So the question is, how do you pitch your ideas to investors and producers? What I'm going to do in this video is explain why pitching matters, all the elements that a good pitch needs to have in it, and the most effective way to tailor your blog line or your pitch to suit whoever it is you're approaching, whether it's an investor or producer, and their sensibility so you can have maximum impact. Are you ready to begin? I have this concept that I talk to my students about, and it's called the circle of death. And it is in the ideation module. And the ideation module is something that I developed through experience and trial and error in my career, where I realized that I used to write things without validating the concept. So I just believed that an idea was a good idea. I just believed that an idea was solid, and I would go forward and start writing it or developing it without actually doing any work to find out if there was a market for that concept. That was obviously a mistake. This was early in my career when I was still amateur. I didn't have any representation, hadn't sold anything. And I learned very quickly the importance of having a level of cognizance and awareness of exactly what you're doing and why, exactly what you're writing and why. That is the reason why I developed the circle of death. Now, quite simply, the circle of death is a sequence of testing measures that you do with any idea that you have to see if that idea survives the circle. And in talking to a student that I had, we're having a conversation with her, or rather we were having a conversation, and I told her to talk to me about her idea. I was like, okay, look, what do you have? And she sent it to me, and it was voluminous. This thing was, it took about 10 minutes just to say the idea and to tell me what it was. And by the time that she'd finished, I asked that, okay, what is this about? Like, who is the protagonist? What is the story about? Who is it? Because I wasn't doing that to be facetious. I wasn't doing that to catch her out. I genuinely didn't know. I'd gotten lost. From the moment that she started explaining it to me to the end of it, I'd forgotten where we were. That is not a good thing by any stretch. That is not what you want to have happen when you're pitching a concept to somebody that you want to respond well, or to give you a job, or to represent you, or to read the script. Because you're pitching it to people that, listen, I've got this script, I want you to read it. They're like, okay, what's it about? What is it? You write out the thing, you send it to them. That needs to make them want to read your script. So as I've said before, look, you could have a situation where you've gone to a film festival. You meet a person that you believe is going to be interested in your work, but then you're in trouble because you don't pitch it effectively. So you do all that work to create the network, to build that foundation. You've got the person is ready to listen to you, and it falls flat at the pitch stage because you say, hey, I've got this thing, and then you spend 10-15 minutes explaining what it is. It doesn't sound like you know exactly what your story is, and the person you're talking to is no longer interested in reading it. They're like, wow, I mean, if the pitch sounds this confused, I can only imagine what the script's going to be like. And do I really have the time to go into something where the initial way in or information I'm getting about this thing is negative? That happens so much that you will not believe. Where people will come to me and want me to read something, and I say, okay, look, what is it? Them telling me the pitch already makes me not want to read the script. Obviously, I've got to be polite and say, well, and make an excuse as to why I'm not going to read it. You've got to make your script sound unmissable. You've got to make it sound like this is going to be the greatest thing ever, at least to that individual that you're dealing with. You've got to make sure that you are so clear about what you're saying, nobody could be confused. Whether or not they like it, that's a separate conversation, whether they want to read it. But there should never be any confusion. There should never be a situation where anybody is unsure what your script is about. So that even if they don't like it, it's not because they were confused, it's because they don't like it. But it's not anything that is missed in how you translated it or what you said. And the part of that is that, look, it's marketability. Like you're creating something that needs to be sold, that somebody needs to invest in, that somebody wants to act in or produce. You've got to create something that sounds like it could be that, which is where, obviously, like I talk about the circle of death, which is where that comes in. You have to have already done the work to validate this concept, that by the time you're pitching it, you're already aware that there is an audience out there for it. You're already aware that there is every chance that this thing is going to be sellable. Somebody would want to produce it. People are primed to say no. That's the truth. People are primed to reject your work. That's the default position. People aren't running around where they're primed to say yes to everybody. The default position is no. You're trying to get them to the yes. You've got to reduce the amount of friction that they have to go through in order to get to the yes. You don't want to be the reason why a potential yes turned into a no. This is the reason why I say all of these things, that you need to get your pitch down to a position where it is going to be easy for somebody to say yes if it is the kind of thing that they would like. Which brings me on to the point of, you're asking, hey, okay, cool, I'm ready, I get what you're saying. What are the elements that my pitch needs to have? Excellent question. I'm going to tell you. The first thing you need to ascertain in a good pitch is the theme. So what is the theme of your story? Like, what themes are you dealing with? What are you trying to say? What is the genre, the place that it fits? These are things that have to be very clear when you're pitching it, so that people can, in their mind, say, okay, I know exactly where this fits. I know who would watch this. I know the kind of audience that would be interested in something like this. The next thing you have to be very clear on is the protagonist. Whose eyes are we seeing the story through? You'd be surprised how many times I've heard pitches from people who want me to read something, and they end the pitch and I'm like, okay, whose story is it? That's like the first question I'll ask. I'm like, okay, you've told me a story. There's a guy, and then this hero does this, and then there's a woman who he meets, and then this. You tell me all of these things, and I'm like, okay, but who is the protagonist? Like, who's the main character? And what perspective are we looking through? That needs to be clear in your pitch, so that whoever you're talking to can take that theme and know what the theme is, like what genre you're working with, what kind of movie it is, what you're trying to say. Take that protagonist and the eyes that you're looking through. Look at those two things and say, okay, I get that. This is the world. This is how we're navigating that world, okay? Which leads to the final point of elements that need to be in your pitch, which is, why is it different? Why is this special? Like, why is this different from something else I might see? What is it about your work or this particular script that you want me to read that makes it different from everybody else's? Again, you being able to do this, different conversation. But that's what your pitch needs to have. It needs to have these three elements. Now, I say this again from my experiences. Like, I'm fortunate enough that I've sold a lot of things. Like, I've always done that. And I've never really been in a position where I've wanted to sell something that I didn't sell when it comes to screenplays and projects. I've never had that experience before. So I say that not to sound overconfident, but more a case of, I feel like I've sort of figured out how to structure things so that people want to buy it. So you're always going to find a buyer for it somewhere. And it comes down to these elements that I'm talking about. If you have these three things, you will find somebody. The reason why is actually quite scientific. It's logical. If you have a theme and a genre, you'll find people who like that genre, whether it's a producer or whatever. They like that genre already, or they know that genre is very popular. That's part one. When you create a protagonist or a perspective from which through which you're going to see that thing, that gives you the opportunity to connect with the person you're pitching to. They might say, oh, that is me, or I know somebody like that, or I understand that kind of person. I'm interested in seeing how this individual would navigate that world. So you've already, even from before they've read anything, you've created that human connection between them where they have that curiosity of like, oh, you know what? I know this. I want to see how this kind of person navigates that world. That's part two. The unique element of it is that anybody who is potentially going to read it, a producer, an investor, whatever, they're then going to think, all right, what is the chances of success of this thing if I did decide to work on this versus everything else that's out there, or what's come out before, or what people are currently working on? When you create something that already has a unique element to it or something different, preferably if it's connected to your personality, like who you are, you're winning at that point. You will find, like, first of all, people will react positively. They'll want to read it, or they'll want to have a conversation. And the chances of you making some kind of relationship with that person is already a lot higher. It goes back to what I talked about in terms of networking. These experiences are not solely for the project you're dealing with at the time. They also could build your network. Many of the people in my network are people who told me no. I'd say a majority of them are people who I didn't work with. Like I didn't actually, the thing I went in to meet them for didn't happen. It just didn't come together. But they had a positive experience working with me, or I had a positive experience working with them or meeting them, I would say rather. And we kept in touch. And some of those people actually come back around and you end up working with in future. Or even if you never do, they introduce you to other people that you end up working with. That happens. You've got to be very cognizant of the way that you do these things, because you need to alter your log line, alter your pitch to match who you're talking to. You need to do the research. You don't just blindly go out and just pitch to everybody the exact same way. Write the same log line with every email you send to somebody. Don't do that. Again, I made that mistake. It's not a good idea. Of course, it's a little bit more work, but you do the research. I do not have a meeting with anybody without researching them. I don't. Every single person that I have a meeting with, I do background work. And I tailor the way that I approach the meeting or I approach giving any material to that person. I do not have the same meeting twice with anybody. Again, I learned that over the years, that it actually makes a very, very big difference. Of course, it is more work for you to do. It is obviously very challenging if you're completely new and you do not have people to ask. Because now I can pick up the phone and call people and say, hey, you know this person? Do you know them? Can you tell me anything about? I can do that now. But when I started and I didn't have that benefit, there's the internet. Even the most basic information, if you just go on the internet and you look into their background, like what they've made, the genres they've worked in, the company they work for, how long they've been there, even that can give you valuable insight into how to tailor your pitch to that person for maximum potential of success. It's very important. If you have an agent or you have a manager, it does help this stage of things in terms of making approaches to people with a pitch. If you're at the festivals, like I said, you go to a festival, fantastic opportunity for you to meet people you typically wouldn't be able to contact directly. You could just be in an event and meet the kinds of agents that you would never be able to directly message because they don't take in calls, or producers you would never be able to access. That's the reason why film festivals are great. But I would say this, if you do not have the benefits of doing that, or you're not somebody who's very good at making those sorts of connections at those events, having an agent or a manager or some kind of representation does make a difference for that, because their job is to do that work for you. So I would suggest looking into people's background as a viable means of getting basic information of how to tailor a pitch to them. Even if it's surface level, you just know what films they made, where they work, who they work with. Doing just the basic information of genre, like, these are the kinds of things they make, this is what they do. It gives you a little insight into how to angle your pitch to them, because everybody isn't the same. And I know myself personally, I will get interested in people who say certain things, or they're in particular boxes. I'm like, oh, you know what? I already have an affinity for that sort of stuff. So I'm already more interested. That's very good work for you to do before you go and pitch, because that research makes you feel more confident in what you're doing.